Good evening, everyone. Welcome to fourth live session for the course Usability Engineering. My name is Neelarnab Dutta. I'm a PMRF fellow from the Department of Design, IIT Guwahati. So, in this particular session, I'll be covering you the key concepts from week 4 lecture videos, and I'll try to clarify your doubts from that particular week lectures. So let's discuss something about what we have learned in the last class. So do you remember what we learned in the last class? So I was discussing about user-centric design process. So what is user-centered design process? So I have discussed about principles, the focus, then key activities of user-centric design process. So did you understand what is user-centric design? Okay, so basically it's a approach. You can call it a approach, or it's a set of processes or set of activities which are defined from the perspective of user. So for all decision making, we keep the user at the center of product design and development. So any uh, decision, for example, to identify the issue, to identify the requirement, or to come up with set of features or functionalities, we always consider users profile as well as the stakeholders requirements, and then only we proceed in the process of design and development. And after giving you details about, so in the last class I discussed about principles, then the focus of UCD, then I discussed about activities of UCD. So I discussed some of the generic features of generic activities of UCD, and also briefly introduced you to the topic, which is design thinking process. So design thinking process is again based on user-centric design process, and it basically break down the entire user-centric design process into three phases. Understand phase, where we empathize and define the problem, the requirements, and then we explore various ideas and with prototypes. Then we test the prototypes and then implement. And we told you that I told you that this is a iterative process. So iteration happens at every stage, as well as across multiple stages. So this is what basically I have discussed in the previous lecture, and today I will cover more details about these individual phases, and I'll start with discussing about how we can get user data using some approaches like user study, or what we call a technique called contextual inquiry. Okay, so briefly, here I am going to tell you about the activities of the design thinking process. So the very first activity is empathize. So already I discussed in the first two lectures that empathize means to understand people's emotion, thinking and feeling. Okay. However, there are two types of empathy. Okay. So empathy can be again break down into two types. One is called affective empathy and one is cognitive empathy. Okay. So imagine you yourself experiencing a particular problem. For example, you touched a hot pan. So there is a hot pan, and when you touch it, you feel that burning sensation. Okay. Okay. And you yourself could understand the consequences and the pain from that particular scenario, okay, that you come across. So this kind of first hand experience of sensing uh, a particular activity is often not possible in a, in a user study or in a actual environment. Okay, so you are fortunate if you yourself is the user, but it happens that sometimes you need to rely on others experience, others brief about experience, others feeling sensation. Okay, so we as a individual, as a human, are programmed to feel what we call as to be empathetic in nature. Okay, so these are different personalities basically. So if you can sense the same level of pain, same level of feeling what the other person feel, you can say that okay, your empathy level is effective empathy. Okay, so imagine the experience you are getting, and or you heard about the experience for from someone else, but still you are feeling the same level of empathy as if yourself have, you know, gone through that particular scenario. So that level of empathy is called effective empathy. Okay, the other level of empathy is basically a logical understanding of people perspective about emotion and feeling. Okay, so in cognitive empathy, we logically understand, basically here we logically understand the feeling, the pain points, but we personally did not experience the same level of feeling. Okay, so this is cognitive empathy. In a user study, both these type of, empathy measurements are required. Okay, both these kind of empathies are required to gather information about patient pain points and requirements. Okay, so it depends upon person to person. First of all, it depends on your nature, like what kind of personality you have, how empathetic you are. Okay, and also it also depends how closely that particular person for whom actually you are going to design something is related. So imagine you are uh, trying to make something for your brother or for your mother, so you will probably more close to effective empathy, because the pain points or the sufferings your family member will have, probably you will more closely, you can relate it to your own, your personal pain and emotion. But if you have to design something for a person who is not known to you, but based on, various video or various, others information, you come across his feeling and, sensations. So you logically try to understand his feelings. So those kind of empathetic, information are come under cognitive empathy, and both of these two types are important. Okay, so in a design thinking process, very first step we do as activity is empathize. We do user study, we do contextual inquiry, and we try to connect with people, with various stakeholders. From some people probably we gather effective empathy, and for some people probably we, have, cognitive empathy. Okay, okay, so after the empathize, we what we have are actually our raw data. Okay, so what we need to do with the raw data is to define a particular problem and try to understand the problem by pinpointing the problem need, and particularly identify the opportunities for new innovation or design opportunity. Okay, So this is very crucial because after a user study or empathize phase, probably you will have a lot of information, and it is up to your visual or your cognitive lens through which you see a problem. Okay, sometimes depending upon designer to designer, researcher to researcher, the problem can be different. So it's very much subjective. So from your cognitive lens or from your perspective, you try to identify and pinpoint the particular problem. Okay, so this is again a task under this defined activity, and you also try to define the design objectives. So for example, in this particular case, when you touch, you feel you feel burning sensation. So that is probably the effective empathy you generate, probably for yourself. And then you pinpoint the problem. So you can pinpoint the problem at different level. Probably you can think of the flame is too high, or which make the this particular pan very hot. Okay, so a problem can be like, example, for this particular problem, pan is heated with high temperature. Okay, with another lens of vision, like under understanding the underlying problem, one may arrive at the conclusion that the pan is made out of metal. That's the problem. Okay, one may again come up with another problem, like, okay, the handle are not you know insulated. So see, different at different level, one can actually uh, analyze the data and actually come up with different problem. So depending upon your problem, you will probably will have different need statements. So for this particular pan is heated with high temperature, probably your need statement will be a way to reduce temperature. Then probably pan is made with metal, probably a way to make pan with non-metallic metal or non-metallic material. Okay. Similarly, handles are not insulated for the particular problem. You may say that, okay, we need to find a way to make the handles insulated, or it should be of some other material. And above all, someone can actually think like, there should not be a pen. Pen itself is the problem. We do not need a pan and heater. We need something like a cooking stove. Okay, so having a pan and a open flame itself is the problem. So make it electric. So you know, from the point of understanding, from the point of data collection to the point of understanding, and then analyzing the data and pinpointing a particular problem, what all we have is our own perspective and lenses of analyzing things. Okay, so this is a stage which define uh, this set of activities. Okay, and after that, what we do is we do ideation. So basically we come up with creative ideas to solve the problems. Okay, and one thing is like, generally before ideation we have to break down, or we need to convert the needs into some sort of specification. So these are design specifications, so like design objectives. So based on the design objectives, we break down these objectives into some specifications. Okay, so based on those specifications, we generally create ideas. Okay, and these ideas or these specifications should be tweaked every time to address user needs. And we need to look for quantity. So a lot of ideas needs to be created or generated at this particular stage, so that we have options for filtering, we have options to check which is the best possible solution for particular problem. So this is what happened in the ideation stage. So again, like I gave that particular example, if a particular designer, or if you are working in a group of this like group, or you have a team of designers, so probably you have all list of problems that a team of designers have formulated initially, but everyone later agreed that not all of these are a real problem. Probably one need to work at this particular level. So that basically the opportunity for innovation one may look into, because these probably may not give you the competitive advantage, or you may not give a opportunity to be unique in the marketplace. So probably you choose one particular problem area, and then as a team you started developing ideas. So if your problem is to make the handles insulated, then probably you will not focus on the design of the pen itself, but you will be focusing on the design of the handles. So you will come up with various type of uh, handles, probably longer handles, so that heat does not transfer that much that far. Okay, so a lot of different ideation you can do at this particular stage. So that's the ideation stage. Next is prototyping. Prototyping means to verify your ideas. You need to have some sort of tactile and real representation of your idea, and you try to see if these ideas work in a real environment. So basically you make very low fidelity prototypes. Low fidelity means the prototypes which are not the actual concepts, but a representation of the actual concept using inexpensive material or a scaled down version of features. Okay, and your what you are trying to see whether from usability perspective this will serve the purpose. Okay, so you involve various stakeholders. So who are the stakeholders in such a particular problem? Probably a housewife, or a restaurant, uh, the cook. He may be the stakeholder. So you need to involve all those people while evaluating your prototypes by showcasing them the the use cases, and let them use your prototype in the actual scenario and give feedback on what needs to be done or what needs to be removed. So basically you try to evaluate what works in your concept and what does not. Also you try to understand the feasibility of your ideas. Okay. Okay, so after these two phases, so basically this is the first phase, this is the second phase. The last phase is, we have two activities in that particular phase. One is testing. So testing basically means, now once you have come up with a final concept, you try to make a high fidelity, and then do user testing. So user testing is again similar to user study, but here you do not inquiry about a particular problem, but you give the user your solution and ask them to use it in that particular natural environment. Okay, and what you try to find out is, you try to identify various usability issues, you try to identify interaction issues, and rectify your design by changing various parameters, okay, or user requirements. Okay, and after testing, if your concept got approval from user study, you then finally implement your design. Okay, by implementation I mean you If it is a commercial product, you commercialize. But if it is not a commercial product, you probably give it to the end user. But in the implementation phase, you always put the vision into effect. That means whatever is your initial thought process of a particular solution, that means whatever you have empathized at the initial stage, and then you felt like this particular problem needs to be eliminated, your final solution should be solving that particular problem. So here you you try to evaluate whether your solution actually is solving that particular problem or not. If not, then you go back this particular process again and reiterate this particular process again. So this is basically the entire design thinking process with its activities. Okay, clear? Okay. Okay, so let's move ahead with the first phase. Okay, so now we'll be discussing about actually using uh, this particular like this particular design thinking process for some project. Okay, so whenever you have to use, or you need to identify a problem, or you want to move ahead in a design project, the very first thing is you do is user study. So why you do user study? So basically it's a process which let you empathize about user problem. Okay, so you do user study to get to know about information about the user. So already we discussed, like in this particular user study, so in a user study basically we empathize. That means you try to sense people's emotion, thinking and feeling. From what? So here are the objectives. So you try to see in what scenario a particular activity is happening, what are the set of activities, and what are the pain points a user encounter while performing certain activity or tasks. Okay. Also, you try to figure out what sort of solutions currently the user or stakeholders are used to, and what are the issues with the competition or competitive products what that you can actually solve. Okay. And you also try to identify what is the ideal solution for a user or a stakeholder. Okay, so very first objective is to benchmark. So what do you mean by benchmark? Yes. So why we benchmark basically? So benchmarking means we are making something as standard. So we are saying like, okay, this is the standard scenario, these are the set of activities they do, because scenario to scenario, things can be different, but we want to benchmark on a set of activities, a set of scenarios, a set of pain points, to proceed further for our design decisions. Okay, so by benchmarking, what we mean is we actually investigate various scenarios and we try to see what is common, okay, across the various interaction scenarios, user activity scenarios, and then we benchmark particular scenarios that, okay, this is the common thing that happens in this particular scenario. For example, here we have two different scenarios. Okay, so this is a scenario of a office environment, and probably you are trying to see you want to try to see how a particular accountant is interacting with a software. Okay. So in this particular scenario, you will notice that the scenario is very crowded. The set of activities involve, this particular accountant using a some sort of pen tablet, okay, to interact with with a laptop having the software. And this is a crowded scenario. That means, people, the next person beside him is only 1 meter away, so the environment little bit noisy. And the space is also, there's a lot of space constraints uh, in that particular environment. So the kind of pain points that particular person may feel is like, okay, he do not have enough room for his hand and leg movement. Probably he may get disturbed due to this particular environmental noise. So he may lack focus on this particular application. So if these are the pain points, or if this is the scenario description you collect from a user study, probably in from another scenario, this kind of setup may be different. So probably, if this is a office from a company like Samsung, and if you visit another company like some Tata group company, probably there you will find a different scenario. Probably the office environment is not that much crowded. The activities are also different. The kind of tools or the apparatus these people are using are also different, and the pain points are also different. So from case to case, the scenarios, the activities, the pain points may differ, okay, when you do a contextual inquiry. So before you arriving at particular conclusion about a particular set of problem, you need to see whether this set of scenarios or activities or pain points are common, you know in this particular problem, for this particular problem. So that's why you benchmark scenarios, activities, and pain points. So if you find a common set of scenarios, a common set of activities, and common set of pain points, then only you can say, okay, this is something actually happening. So we need to focus on finding a solution. Okay, so that is what is benchmarking. Understanding competitive landscape means you try to see how currently uh, the user is performing a task, what sort of tools, what sort of techniques they are using, to do their daily activities. For example, if you see this particular scenario, this another scenario, and if you see what sort of activities this particular nurse is doing, she is probably using some gauze to wrap around the person leg. Okay, and this particular lady who, she's a soldier, and she's also holding that person's leg. So probably from the scenario you can understand this is probably a military hospital, because the nurse also is wearing a military dress. Probably he is a soldier, wounded soldier, and they are practicing some sort of probably wound healing procedure, where they are actually using some sort of gauze to wrap around. So this set of activities, this set of scenario, and the pain points while doing this maybe differ from a normal government hospitals. So that's why you need to benchmark. Now you need to understand, like, what is the competitive landscape. That means for this particular set of activities, what are the various solutions available. So here, for example, if in a military hospital they are using gauze, probably in a very you know uh, sophisticated private hospital, probably they use some ready-made gauze or some sleeves that do not need many manual wrapping around the wound. So those solutions are also competition against a normal bandage. Okay, so you need to think about how useful it is to use those competitive products against these normal bandages. Okay, and if the particular person, the user or the stakeholder, is if he's suffering some issue, then what is the particular issue she is suffering, and what sort of solution she have in her mind. Okay, generally they do not have any solution, but they have that particular mental model, so about a particular solution, like what best uh, will probably solve a particular problem. Okay, so once you empathize what you are looking for in a user study is certain factors or outcomes to collect, okay, in response to your contextual inquiry procedure. Okay, so there are three factors generally that come into picture when we do a contextual inquiry. So they are user. So basically how user is related, we try to discover user needs. So in a contextual inquiry, that's a prime goal, but these are again secondary factors. The very first thing that we do in user study is contextual inquiry. So basically we try to discover what are the circumstances in which the user is performing a particular task. Okay, we try to understand what influences this particular task, okay, to happen in that particular way. For example, you need to ask the question like why this particular person is holding the leg. Okay, these are like questions very primitive, like how Newton saw a apple fall from the tree, and he questions like why the apple fall. Okay, so it's again the skill of the designer or the researcher who is actually involved in a contextual inquiry process to raise these questions. Okay, so once you have experience, you will probably have these questions automatically in your mind. But for newbies who are new in the contextual process, you need to frame those questions beforehand while you go for a contextual inquiry process. So when you ask this particular question, like we are why this person or this lady is holding his leg by hand, so probably you are looking for an influencer. So influencer means you can say, okay, because there is no way that particular person, one one answer you get is like the person cannot lift his leg by himself. Okay, so that is one thing that may be a observation. So one observation can be like, okay, person cannot lift his leg. The other observation can be, okay, that okay, person cannot lift, but there should be some way, some provision for keeping his leg high. So that means no provision to keep his leg high. So these sort of observations are necessary in a user study. Okay, so only just by going into a context does not mean that you will collect relevant information. it's it's depends upon your thinking process, your window of looking a particular scenario, how you do a particular inquiry. Basically you try to understand the circumstances and the influence that that are involved in particular task executions. Okay, the another factor is uses. Okay, so this is like what task the user perform. So you need to, for this particular, for such kind of inquiry, you need to observe first, in a clinical procedure probably what all, or what all sort of activities the nurse do. Okay, so probably the very first set of activities is just cleaning the wound site, then probably preparing the wound site for applying this gauze, and then after that probably she will do some other therapy or treatment. So all those observations are required when you do a user study. So basically you try to identify the uses, okay, uses of activities, uses of product, okay, and you also try to gather information about in great detail about how the user performed a particular task. So in a user study we don't look for information at only the abstract level. We, we collect information at a very minute atomic level, where we try to understand like how its activities are carried out and how these activities are connected, and what are the influence of these activities, like how these activities have been planned by the user and how the actions are taken place. So all sort of information we collect in great detail in a user study. And along with that we also collect information about various tools, various techniques that are necessary for doing particular task in a scenario. So this is about these three factors, and once we discover information about the particular scenario, their influences, then the very particular task, particular artifacts, we try to understand the particular pain points, and based on that we try to understand the user requirements or needs. Okay, so these are the key factors that play a vital role in a user study process. And as an outcome, these are various outcomes we can have depending upon our inquiry from a user study process. So we may understand like user goals. For example, in this particular even if you are not doing any interview session, even if you do not ask that particular lady what she is doing, if you observe her activities, you may actually probably get to know about what are user goals, what are her goals, okay, what she is doing probably. So probably after looking or after being there in the particular context for some time, you will probably get to know about her motivation, her goal. Then we may probably see various workflows, okay, we may know understand the context of use, which particular artifact is used in which particular case, okay, and why that particular artifact is used, and which particular way that particular probe or instrument is used. So all those information can be collected by just observing. Then you may also inquire about who are the competitors, okay, who are the influencers, like why that particular product needs to be procured, or why this particular person actually needs to hold the lake. So all these comes under influencers, okay. Then you also try to understand the pain points. Sometimes in a contextual inquiry you come across those pain points naturally, but sometimes if you have a bad luck, probably you may not uh, get to know about those pain points. So in those case you go for secondary source, or you may go for interviews with the stakeholders to know about such pain points which generally they come across. You also can identify various usability issues uh, based on what they are using for a particular procedure, okay. And you also can get information about a particular mental model, like what is the expectation of a user. So mental model does not mean the conceptual model or the idea, the concept, but these are more like what set of features probably the user is or the stakeholder is looking for in a solution, and what is missing in this particular procedure. So probably if you can identify those, that itself let you know about the mental model of the particular user, okay. So once you get to know about all these outcomes, you then you then go ahead with the design process, and you ideate to make certain design decisions in the three directions. Okay, so these are the three main innovation directions in a product design process. So a product is designed from the perspective of aesthetics, from the perspective of functionality, from the perspective of human factors. So in a clinical inquiry, or in a contextual inquiry, or in a user study, sometimes probably you may come across issues which tell you about limited functionality, or you may find out that certain okay, limitation of competitive product. Okay, so these aspects which can be identified from the perspective of functional limitation, those can be addressed by innovating your solution by functional upgradation. Okay, so you incorporate new feature, new functionalities, and that way you can actually solve the particular solution, a particular problem. Another aspect can be aesthetic. Generally this does not related to, it's not related to a medical product, but if it is some other product, if it is a UI of a mobile application, probably aesthetic include minimalistic design, legibility of information. So if you have a very crowded application, lot of data, probably you will improve the aesthetic of this particular interface. So that will be probably your innovation goal. So in this particular direction, probably you can invent, or you can improve your design. Another direction in which you can design around your product is human factors. So human factors consider ergonomics as well as usability. So ergonomics is more like your, it has physical ergonomics, physical reads. So we talked about inaccessibility of a product or a solution when there are issues with physical reach. For example, when you are holding a mobile app and your thumb is not able to reach particular icon, probably that's a issue with ergonomics, that is physical. Similarly, cognitive ergonomics talked about cognitive load. When you have a lot of information, and probably you need to reduce number of information in order to improve cognitive load in the information processing. So that can be taken care from cognitive ergonomic perspective. Usability is about making the things easy to use. So when you see that a particular solution is perfect in all such way, from aesthetic, functionality, or ergonomics point of view, but somehow it's not very easy to use, because maybe for expert user there is no efficient path. Okay, so that may be a usability problem, so which you try to solve. Okay. So these are various directions in which you can actually bring your solution into picture after you collect these informations from your user study. Clear? So if you have any doubt, please feel free to ask. So you can use the message box, as well as you can directly chat with me. So any doubt? Okay. Okay. Fine. Okay, so before we start our user study, we need to know what are various types of user study. Okay, so just I'll brief you again. So far we understand what is user study, what are the objectives of user study, what are the factors involved in user study, what are the outputs from user study, and what are their significance, and we also discuss about how you can actually improve, or in which direction you can actually invent your particular product. Okay, but before you go for a user study, you need to know actually like what sort of uh, user study, what user study techniques you may require in a particular context. Okay. Okay, so there are different techniques to collect experiences. Okay, so basically what we collect data, what like the nature of the data in a from a user study is experiences of user. Okay, whether you consider a field study where you as a designer yourself involved in a particular task, you capture your experience, your pain points, your understanding of activities. Similarly, when you interview someone, you probably try to understand their reflection on particular experience, like what pain points they faced, how easy it was. Similarly, when you observe someone doing a particular task, for example, in this particular case, the nurse is wrapping that bandage. So you probably try to capture the information from as a third person. So basically, you are trying to capture the experience of seeing that particular actions happening. Okay. So what we have is something called self theory, and we have two types of experience data based on that particular theory. One is experiencing self, the other is remembering self. Experiencing self means what we experience in a moment, cognitively as well as physically. That means here we are more talking about data that has been experienced in a real time, and the experience is a reflection of you being in that particular environment. So this is more real in nature, and this is like first hand experience. Now remembering self is something which is like reflection of what you have experienced in the past. Okay? So we as a human have three kind of memories. One is we have sensory memory. Sensory memory means we have different senses like touch, we have vision. Okay, then we have auditory senses. Okay, so when you remember something based on particular sound, uh, particular vision, okay, on particular look or particular touch, those comes under sensory memory. For example, you may recognize the sound of a crow. So the sound of a crow, you do not have to actually put it in your short term or long term memory. So other type of memories are like short term memory and long term memory. So these are the three types of memory we have. And what happens, like when we are involved in a particular field study, we collect these two set of experiences or memories, the one that is captured through from sensory memory and one that is from your short-term memory. Those informations are generally captured in this kind of data, and the other data is more like long-term memory, where actual detail about the scenarios or activities sometimes may be missing, so you cannot rely on this information very much. So these are more useful as a secondary source of data when you are unable to collect data from first-hand experience or data from field study. Okay, so these are the two types of experiences: experiencing by yourself or remembering information based on your reflection of past memory. Okay, the user study are generally of two types. One is generative, the other is evaluative. So evaluative is more about validating a particular design decision. This is very much similar to user testing of a product, but it is like evaluating your own design and to make changes. So this is what this will I'll not be talking today. So in today's session, I'll be discussing about generative type of user study. So generative user study mainly concern about exploring problem space and learning about user and stakeholders. Okay, and generative user study can be breakdown divided into two types. One is behavioral, the other is attitudinal. So behavioral study is the one where actually we observe the user behavior while user performing certain activities. Okay, so this is basically what we are talking about experiencing self. So this kind of behavioral study involve understanding the actual behavior when displayed in a context. So in a particular scenario, when we observe a particular set of behaviors or emotions, those comes under behavioral study. The other type is attitudinal. So attitudinal study talk about the reflection of past experiences. So these are generally techniques or the studies where you try to understand one's so a person's attitude towards a particular context or problem. So an example of behavioral study is contextual inquiry or field study, and attitudinal example is interview. Now contextual inquiry also can have interviews, and but a interview is more happens in a closed environment and which is not natural. So we generally do not talk while a person is involved in a particular task. So often the particular user give you information as a reflection of his past memory, okay, or recent memory. So sometimes we miss details in such kind of user study. But both these two types of user studies are necessary and are used widely in various scenarios. Now, depending upon the nature of the data, these two types can be further divided into two types. One is qualitative and another is quantitative. So, if we are looking for information which are qualitative in nature, for example, we try to understand how things are happening. So, those are qualitative information. For example, if we try to understand like how a nurse take care of a wound, that means we are asking a question where the information, the data, the answer comes in the form of a description. Okay? So the answer in the form of a description means the data is qualitative in nature. Okay, so how, why, when you ask this set of questions we get descriptive answers. So this set of uh, techniques are called qualitative techniques. So an example of qualitative techniques are interviews. So if you ask interviews, most of the time a interview will give you only descriptive answers. So later you analyze those information based on your own themes or criterias. but initially the nature of the data is qualitative. That's why it's called qualitative technique of user study. The another type of user study is quantitative. So in such kind of user study, the data we look for are quantitative in nature. So quantitative means we are talking about numbers here. So if you want to know about, okay, what, how many or how much or how many patient admit every day, okay, or if you ask what is the cost, what is the cost of cost of a treatment, all these enquiries give you a results which are quantitative in nature. So an example technique is questionnaire. So generally you ask such kind of questions through a questionnaire, which are fixed set of questions with very definitive numerical answers. Okay, so basically we can have behavioral technique with quantitative data set as outcome, as well as we can have behavioral study with qualitative source of data as output. Similarly, same is true with attitudinal study. So we can conduct attitudinal study and then we again look for either qualitative or quantitative set of data. Okay, clear? Okay. Okay, so let's start the process of user study. Okay, so far we came to know about the various factors, outcomes, the direction of innovation, and the type of user study. And now let's start with knowing about the actual process of user study. So very first thing as a designer you need to do in a user study procedure is user segmentation. So you need to first do user segmentation. So what you do in user segmentation is basically you categorize users based on certain rules. Basically, why you do that? Because you may, okay, you may have different stakeholders in a particular context. Okay, so the nature of information, if you collect from individual users, it may be differ. Okay, however, if you can categorize a particular set of users based on certain criteria, probably you will be able to collect information on similar problems or similar activities. Okay, so for that reason, why we do user segmentation as an initial task. For example, in this particular scenario, when you go for a user study, you try to identify who are the various stakeholders. For example, this is army hospital, so probably you will may find patient or wounded soldier, soldier. Then you may have nurses, then you may have doctors, then you may have the family members. Okay, family members of the patient. Now when you do a user study on some random sample where you have different user group, people representing different user group, what happens, like the uh, uh, nature of the information that you gather is will be also very random. Okay, so it will be hard for you to come in to some conclusion that what is actually the problem, so what sort of issues they are facing, because probably the work profiles of these people will be different and they may have different issues. So collecting information from such random user group will be very difficult. So generally we do user segmentation as the first task. Now when you actually collect, when you do a segmentation, you then go for your inquiry and you move your user study procedure from one group to another. So you can start your inquiry first with patient. So you go to all the patient that have this particular state of a clinical state or disease condition, and then you try to understand their issues, how that happened, why that happened, and what are the treatments they are going through, what are the pain points they are facing. So all those information probably you will better know when you ask this set of questions. Similarly, when you go to the nurse group, you will ask some different set of questions. Now you are probably asking what sort of treatment you are giving, what is the standard procedure you need to follow, what are the pain points you are facing. So the pain points of the nurses will be different from the patient. So their pain points more related probably with the techniques or the procedures or probably the tools they are using. But here for the patient, probably the pain points belongs to their quality of care. Similarly, you can talk with doctors also. The doctors probably will give a more abstract information about the hospital and the pain points. Okay, so from the doctors probably you will not get detailed information about particular procedure. Probably you will get to know more from a more like a information from an expert. Okay, so those are also important, and you need to also understand what are their pain points. Then you may talk with the family members of patients and then try to see what problems they are facing. Probably those issues or experiences are not shared with the patient, so you may come across a different set of information from which you may understand various activities that the family members have to perform in a hospital setting, and also their pain points. So when you do such segmentation, it is easier for you to frame the set of questions, to frame your requirements and evaluate the data later for further research to collect information on requirements. Okay, so that's why we do user segmentation as the first activity. And there are different criterias actually we may set for segmenting a stakeholder group. So mostly market researchers segment user group based on gender, age, educational level, marital status, income, and so on. So often you may have come across phone calls from the credit card companies, and they call you based on the information they actually have in their databases. So probably you fall under some gender, you fall under certain age group, some educational level, some status, marital status, income level. So they categorize you into some particular group, and they said, okay, these are the people whom should we call for a credit card or credit card, and these are the set of people whom we should call for loan. So that's how they decide what to offer for which set of stakeholders. Similarly, the another way you can segment is based on psychographic profile of users, which basically defines the attitude and perception of people based on certain geographical condition or subject matter. So generally it is always related to demography. So probably if you try to identify a group of people who are facing some problems in the society, for example, if you say age group, so age group can be one. Location, so location, then income level, Okay, so based on these, probably you may decide to ask them, okay, what sort of, probably if they fall under a particular profile, you may ask them like, uh, what are the employment opportunity. Okay, so what is the political scenario? Are you happy with the current political steps the government is taking? So all those questions you can ask based on grouping users or stakeholders based on their psychographic profiles. Similarly, you can also break down or segment stakeholder profile based on their work profiles as well as responsibilities. For example, in this particular scenario, we are breaking down user profiles based on nursing, patient, then we are saying doctors, then family members. So these are based on their work profiles and responsibilities. Uh, Also, we can break down stakeholders or group them based on common issues, frustration, or sufferings. Okay, so if you have employees, so if you have a lot of employees, and some of the employees are actually working in some hazardous environment, and they face certain issues and have certain sufferings, probably you can group them under one category, and then you can inquiry about their activities, their scenarios, those scenarios, and you can inquiry about their pain points. Okay, so that's how also you can do. And sometimes you group users based on their expertise level. For example, novice users, knowledgeable users, or expert users. So these kind of segmentation you generally do when you do a evaluative study. So what happens when you actually try to investigate a competitive product or your own product? You try to see how usable your product for novice users. What are the usability issues with intermediate users? What are the interaction issues with expert users? So if you break down these user profiles, probably you will be getting information which are distinct from these different groups, stakeholder groups. So probably you may identify that the applications that you are developing probably is very helpful for expert user, but it has learnability issue with novice users. Probably you may see like, okay, novice users are very they are finding this particular application very easy, but for the expert users it is very time taking. I mean, like, they are not happy with the efficiency. There is no way the expert user actually can skip certain steps. Okay, so to study such usability issues or such to do certain such evaluation, you break down your stakeholders or users based on their expertise level. Okay, so that is the first step in your user study. Any question? Okay, so the next task is stakeholder analysis. Now the next thing is like, when you are segmenting your user, this is to conduct your user study. To You do that in order to arrange your set of questions, in order to you know plan your study, and what techniques you will be using for which particular group. Now, the another thing that you need to do in a user study, which is the second important task, is stakeholder analysis. Now, when you are dealing with a particular context or particular scenario, you come across various stakeholders. So you will have again a basket We have a lot of stakeholders. So in a hospital setting, probably you have family members, patient, hospital authority. Then you have the nurses, the doctors, and you yourself as the designer. Now the person under whom you are working, probably if he is the CEO of a company, that person. So all fall under stakeholder list. Now you need to map these stakeholders and try to understand what roles they play and how important is their role in the context of your project. So for that purpose, you use something called Mendelow's matrix. Okay, so there are various techniques that you can use, but Mendelow's matrix is one of the very popular matrix that you can use. So this particular matrix use a two-dimensional plotting of the stakeholders. So you have two axes here. One is the x, which is basically describing the interest of the stakeholders. The other axis, which is the y-axis, it describes the power, okay, of these particular stakeholders. So this entire space, this particular space, can be divided into four quadrants. Okay, so you can say this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, and this is 4. I'm just numbering them in some order, but that's order is not there actually. Okay, now if we see these, so basically this particular matrix try to define the stakeholders from the perspective of how much interest they take for a particular project and how much power they have to influence a particular project. So if you see, this particular quadrant is actually describing a stakeholder having high interest. So high interest, and you have high power because it is up from this direction also, and also high from this direction. So this is high interest, high power. Now this particular quadrant defines someone who has low interest but high power. Okay, then here we have someone who is having high interest but low power. Then we have someone who is having low interest and low power. Now what we need to do is to first identify all set of stakeholders. Okay, so basically these are the various stakeholders we have identified previously. Now segmenting this is a different thing, because segmenting, that means you already segmented these are the family people, these are the hospital authority, this is the CEO, these are the designers. So already you segmented. Now we are talking about where you want to position these set of user segmentation in this particular stakeholder matrix to understand their importance. Okay, so the rule that we need to follow is that one that falls in the high interest and high power quadrant, we need to manage them closely. Okay, that means these are the key stakeholders who are directly interested in your project and exert great influence over outcome. So they have power to change the outcome, and also they are highly interested. So such people can be either the CEO of the company for whom you are actually doing a particular design work, or he may be a doctor who have requested you to design something. Okay. The second type, which is this particular quadrant, where it described that that particular person have low interest but high power. That means currently they are not interested in the project, but they have power to impact your project greatly. So imagine you talked about the hospital authority. Okay, so this may be your CEO or doctor who is like collaborative doctor. So he is also involved in the project. That's why he is showing so much interest and he has the power to implement. Now, hospital authority is someone who may not be interested in your project, but they have the power. Or government of India in policy building, they may have the power, but they are not interested currently probably in your project because they are unaware of your project. So you need to keep these people satisfied. Okay, so you need to make to keep them happy. Similarly, there are people who are high interest but low power. That means they are very much enthusiastic for your project, for its outcome, but they do not have they have little power to overcome the outcome. Okay, so they have little influence, or they have little power to influence the outcome. Actually, that's why they have little power, but they are highly interested. So you keep them informed, and often you use this sort of person for your research. You try to use them for your for enquiries during your study. And example can be uh, nurses. So they are very much interested in your project because that will help them, but they have low power. Similarly, um, those can be also patient. Okay, so patient can be someone who is also interested in your solution, but they have little power to influence the outcome. Now the fourth type, who have low interest and low power. That means low interest, low power means these are the least important stakeholders for your project, and you just monitor them to check whether they sometimes fall into the other quadrants. Otherwise, they are not much important. So example can be the person who is a cleaner, in a setting, in a healthcare setting, or he may be the pharmacy guy, okay, who give medication, who like who send medication to the patient. So they have little interest in your project and they have little power, so those may not be the right stakeholder. Now you take these rules, you follow these rules and arrange the stakeholders into this particular matrix. Okay, so another thing is that you need to include the attitude of the stakeholder every time you interact with them. Okay, so this is the third dimension where you use plus or minus sign to capture the attitude of the stakeholders. For example, after you map a set of stakeholders, for example, here is the CEO, here is the hospital authority, here is the nurse, and here is the, I mean, nobody is like cleaner probably. Now you set, now whom to give importance and how much. Okay, now based on that you may decide like what should be your communication plan in a project. Okay, so this set of understanding you should have, and in order to achieve that you do stakeholder analysis. So that's the importance of stakeholder analysis and use of this particular Mandela matrix, so that you come to know the right stakeholder whom you should be interviewing, whom you should be talking to, whom you should be observing to get right information, and whom you should include in your project for future development, okay, and evaluation. Okay. So for example, here's an example. So hospital authority, power high, interest low, doctors high high, project investigator high high, patient is again low low. The current status is neutral, so hospital authority doesn't have any attitude for your project, but you want them to be positive so that they procure your product in future. The doctors are positive; they are the key stakeholder, and you want them to be positive also in future. Similarly, project investigators are always they have to be positive in the current time as well as in future. Patient may be negative sometime, so this is just the example, like they may have bad feeling about your product, but you want them to be at least neutral. Okay, and based on that you plan like how you will plan for your first visit and how you will be engaged with them in a regular manner. Okay, so these are the various strategies you can adopt when actually you uh, do a stakeholder analysis. Clear? Okay. Okay, so next is the user study. Okay, so the very final thing in a empathize phase is after you do your user segmentation and stakeholder analysis, you do user study. And here I'm discussing a particular user study technique which is called contextual inquiry, which involves direct observation of a particular context or a particular scenario. So basically, you go to the context and do the inquiry. That's why it's called contextual inquiry. So, okay, this is like a direct observation technique, and which is much beneficial when you are doing a project for the first time. And this is better than doing another others kind of interview, other kind of user study like interviews or questionnaire, uh, because of the nature of the information, which are more real, and these are based on first hand experience. That's the reason why, and this is one of the very popular method of user study. Now, the purpose of user study is the purpose of contextual inquiry is to get data suitable for the design. That means you need to understand in great detail the practice, understand the structure of the work practice. Okay, so basically I'll be giving you the same example. In this particular setting, you need to understand basically who are the user and stakeholders, and how they use certain facilities. Okay, and how they perform some various activities. Okay, and how the stakeholders are related with one another. So this structural representation of work practice you need to identify and understand in a contextual inquiry process. So that is one of the objectives. Another objective is to get complete and concrete understanding of various domain expertise or user profiles and try to articulate their knowledge and skill which are not explicitly visible from outside. So you basically try to collect information probably their about their cognitive processes, their activities, their decision making activities which affect a particular outcome. So those sort of information you need to collect in a contextual inquiry process. Then collect the data in a great detaility. So we are not here looking for general abstraction or defining the task from a from an abstract level. We want to know the task in great detail, as if you if you are asked to recreate, if you are asked to perform a particular activity, The designer should also be knowing that particular process. Okay, so that level of details you need to collect as a part of contextual inquiry. So there are mainly four principles. Context. So first is context. That means go to the user workplace. So you need to visit the user workplace and see the work as it unfolds in a natural way. That means you do not affect a particular scenario. The scenario should exist in a natural way, and you are the only person who visit there and try to capture information from that setting without affecting the natural, the way the things happening there. Okay, so you do not invite user to your setting and ask them questions. You visit there and you try to capture information as if you are not affecting that particular scenario. Okay, so the difference between this particular technique versus your interview is that here, rather than getting information as summary, you are getting information as ongoing experiences. So you are seeing, you know, and listening, feeling all the scenarios by being yourself in that particular context. Okay, rather than getting some sort of secondary information based on someone's reflection. Okay, so that's different. The another way how it is different than interview technique is that here we are getting concrete information. That means we know exact details about tasks, about stakeholders, their relationships, their influences, rather than some abstract data which are which have which lack detailed information. Okay, so this is the first principle. The second principle is partnership. So make the user collaborate with you in doing his particular job. Okay, so do not control the way the data has been given to you, rather control your inquiry process or your interview process. So in a contextual inquiry process also you conduct interviews, but not the way you actually conduct interviews. This is like while observing a particular process in a real time, whenever you have certain inquiries, you ask that particular person, okay, why you are doing this? Okay, so what are you facing any problem? So after looking at his facial expression, probably you may think like that particular person is facing certain issues, so you may ask questions. Okay, so do not try to control the data, rather try to control the process so that you get to know what you have intended. Now also play with relationship model. That means play your role in such a way that user is eager to give you information. So do not try to be in a dominating position. So there are different relationship models. For example, master slave model, teacher student model, then scientist, and then research field model, then the opposite, friend model. So like that, you choose your personal persona and behave in such a way that the user is eager to give you information. So be part of the system without affecting the natural way the particular task that needs to be happen. Okay, the third principle is interpretation. That means give meaning to your observation. So what you may get as an outcome of a contextual inquiry process is just information, which may be your video information. You may able to capture videos. Sometimes you do not have videos, probably you may have certain notes which you took while trying to see things, or you may record, you have, or you may uh, write some description. So you have all sort of data, but you try to change this data to relevant information by putting the context into picture. For example, if you are seeing just data that this lady, the officer is lifting the leg of that particular patient, she's helping this particular nurse. Okay, so that's data, but information is that there is lack of facility which can support the person lifting his leg. So that's the information. Okay, so converting data to information require the lenses of the designer in which way he is actually seeing a particular problem. Okay, now that's what we call as frame, the frame of reference. Okay, then make hypothesis. For example, if this happens in that way, what may be the adverse effects or what may be the implications? Okay, so those you formulate, okay, as a part of interpretation process, but do not bias the information. So always listen carefully whenever user is providing information, and do not try to put your own perspective into user's mind, or do not try to capture data in such a way which combines your perspective as well as the user's perspective, because we as a designer also have our own lenses, our also frame of reference. So we go there in a context for a contextual inquiry with our mindset of making some design or contributing with some solution. So do not try to put those lenses while capturing information. So that's no, that's a principle in a contextual inquiry. Finally, the fourth principle is focus. So keep the conversation going in a focused manner based on your objectives. Okay, so do not get deviated for unnecessary topics. So be concise, and be remain in the objective. So steer your conversion gently, so whenever the user actually move away with conversation, try to pivot him with the objective you have in your mind. So this needs expertise, and also it needs some sort of experience and learning to conduct contextual inquiry efficiently. So but these are the four key principles that one need to consider when we conduct contextual inquiry. Clear? Okay. Okay, so what we will do after you conduct a contextual inquiry? So how we will capture the information? So the next thing what you do after you do a contextual inquiry is to use modeling techniques to capture the information. So what happens generally when we go for interview in real time, we cannot capture all informations. So we choose some means of capturing information, like we take notes or capture images, or if possible capture videos. Okay, but what you understand at a cognitive level may not be same as what actually you have note down in your notes, or what you have taken as images. So after a while when you look for the information, probably those notes, the images or videos may not be sufficient for you to understand a particular scenario or context or activities. So that's the reason why you need to have the proper means or proper techniques of capturing the contextual information and store them in a format which can be used at a later time. So generally, we designers are used to mind mapping. So mind mapping is a great technique where we just do this kind of uh, block diagrams to map various things, map our thought process, map certain procedures, map certain activities. Okay, but what happens in a general um, mind mapping, if we include all set of information, for example, if we include stakeholder, if we include a process, then we include a instrument, okay, artifact, or a space. Okay, what happens, like, it is hard to define things in a proper way, and again it is hard to establish relationship between different entities. Okay, so it is better to capture information in such a way that helps you to retrieve them later in time. Okay, so researchers have suggested certain way how mind mapping can be done to capture the information out of a contextual inquiry in the form of five five distinct models. Okay, so these are flow model, cultural model, sequence model, physical model, and artifact model. Okay, so very first thing is flow model. Okay, so flow model, what is flow model, how we design flow model is already discussed in the class actually. So basically flow model is a one where we include different figures or different structures to represent the stakeholders. Okay, so customer is stakeholders, then set of actions, then the communication, the kind of communication you perform between two individual or between two actions. Okay, so all those information about a system or about a context you capture using such a graphical model. Okay, so this is what we call as flow model. We represent the flow of information as well as flow of actions using arrows. Okay, and in between arrows we write down certain communication. So this flow model defines stakeholders, it defines various activities, various actions, various influences, and all set of artifacts involved in a particular contextual inquiry process. So this is like the grand mind map involving all sort of information. Okay, so let me give an example here. So I'll not discuss how this is formulated, but I will rather try to retrieve information by looking at this particular flow model. Okay, so imagine, so this is basically a student project, and this is a flow model for a restaurant. Okay, so this is about the daily activities of a restaurant in a daytime, and after taking these sort of images, taking lot of notes, you know the particular student have developed, he have come up with this particular flow model, and let's see if this particular flow model helps you in understanding the context or not. Okay, so imagine me as a third person or as the same person who did this particular project after 6 months. Okay, and try to understand like what was the context and what happens daily in particular restaurant. Okay, so see here, we here define the restaurant name with a group symbol called Vaibhavi. So the name of the restaurant is a Vaibhavi. Okay, and it tries to first define external stakeholders. So who are the stakeholders? Okay, so it says like customer is one stakeholders, then maintenance agencies who maintains the restaurant from cleaning or electrical or other supply point of view. Those are from the maintenance perspective. Maintenance agencies are external stakeholders, and the vendors who supply raw materials, food raw materials, those are also external supply, external stakeholders. And also there are other stakeholders who are like the regulatory or local authorities who give permission for this particular restaurant to be in that particular place. Okay. So these are the representation of stakeholders. So we come to know that okay, so in this particular restaurant we have these other various stakeholders. So a particular restaurant needs approval from local authorities, as well as he needs to be in contact with vendors, maintenance guy, and as well as the customers. Okay. Now it describes next a customer how he dines in a particular day. So a customer first enter a restaurant. So these are not activities of a customer. So customer enters the restaurant. He gets seated in a dining area. Okay, when you say get seated, that means someone has to influence him. So this influence, see, this influence comes from attender of the customer. So this is bi-directional. That means customer can also inquire about sitting options or sitting availability, and or the attender also can ask that particular person to sit in that particular place. Okay, then the person customer go through the menu. Now here also if you see, you have the line from the attender of customer who can actually guide the customer about the menu. Okay, then the customer order food is again bidirectional. See, this is this way he actually giving order to the receives order. So this is the next activity. So for order food he needs to convey that message, and someone needs to receive order, and they also give you the information back that particular menu or order is available or not, particular food item is it should be available, then only the order can be placed. That's why it's again a two-way communication. So once order is received, now here with different color, if you can see, now there is a task flow of the restaurant from inside. So received order, now notified the cook about the order. Okay, this is how it happens. Now, so he needs to update the information that receive order through a server. Okay, those information are also fed in a server. So the server gave him the feedback. That means this is done. Now get cleaners arrange plates, cutlery to the serve. So now the cleaning guy or the cutlery, the service people, they need to prepare for food serving. Then they serve food to the customer. Okay, now this is a particular sequence which the restaurant follow after receiving a particular order. Now this food has been served, okay, using the same path. Okay, and now he check is the food served. If yes, then he eats and he pay bills and he leaves. So here you can see another task flow of a customer. Here you can see a task flow of a restaurant cook. Okay, so this is the service helper. Similarly, if you notice here cook 2, so these are the reports, and these are the vegetable cutter. His flow of task when he actually cuts vegetables. So his job is to only wash utensils, clean counter tables, remove garbage, and throw keep the space clean. And he opens. So basically here, what we identified here is that the cleaner himself is the person who opens the restaurants and cleans the premise. So this set of information we could capture here, that the cleaning guy itself is the person who opens the restaurant, then he washes the overnight utensils, okay, then he cut the vegetable, so the cleaner cuts the vegetable, okay, and then pick up leftover. So maybe there's a missing line here, okay, okay, okay. So here's another chain. So makes ready as per order. So this is from the second cook, hand to the server. So this is how the service is provided. Put tools. So these are different task flows of different stakeholders within that particular restaurant. And the way these informations are represented here let you reveal or retrieve the information later in the time, when you probably forget about those initial raw information, which probably is not sufficient you know to describe the particular scenario. So once you actually, as a project investigator, if you look into this particular flow model, you should be able to capture all sort of information, like how this particular restaurant operates, who cleans and who opens, or who cut the vegetables, and what are their daily set of activities, how a customer places their order, who take care of the order, and how the food is served. So all sort of informations are captured through this flow model. Now, during a contextual inquiry, what happens, sometimes you may see that food has not been served to you because of some miscommunication. That means you may identify certain fault in the system. So this is example. So those faults needs to be represented using a thunderbolt sign. Okay, so you can use any signal. Thunderbolt signal is just a representation to say that, okay, there's a breakdown. So when you have an electrical line, if there's a breakdown, then they represent that using thunderbolt sign. So circuit breaker basically. That means there's a communication break. So if food is not served because of communication break, that means there's the point where there exists a pain point, and a system, or there's a requirement of an intervention to solve this particular issue. So generally, when you do a contextual inquiry, you visit the place multiple times and look for various activities, various scenarios, and sometimes you may get exposed to such breakdown points where things go wrong, and you try to capture those events for your further inquiry and design purpose. Okay. So that is basically flow model. Now sequence model is basically one particular sequence of activities of a particular task. Okay, so we try to see those sequence in a great detail. For example, in a flow model, probably we try to mention a particular task sequence by only six blocks. But actually, if you go into great detail, probably you may identify that particular sequence may consist of 20 or 50 processes. Okay, so in a sequence model, you try to capture in detail the way a particular task is followed. And sometimes what happens when flow model fails to give you breakpoints, Sequence model can give you breakpoints. For example, here opening kitchen door, take two cylinder placed overnight in the kitchen out. So this is a sequence of cooking for lunchtime. So this is an observation, the observation of a cooking procedure where the designer have observed this particular sequence of actions. So he captured this in great detail, and he tried to see if there are issues in this particular procedure. So he says like, uh, takes two cylinder placed overnight, then open, store, select fresh eggplants, washes in a bucket, then get large utensil, see getting utensil, then selecting fresh vegetable, then cook the vegetables overnight from the so there are vegetables which are already preserved last night, and they are in a freezer, so those are taken out. Then dal and pulses also soaked overnight. So these are the steps which the restaurant follow in great detail in cooking, in this particular cooking task for a lunch period. Okay, so generally sometimes what happens, you may observe breakpoints or something happens, okay, while doing particular task. So what happens when you observe a breakdown in here, okay, in a flow model. So when you represent this particular sequence in great detail, probably you can pinpoint that particular breakpoint, because when you represent the same sequence in a flow model, you only have four places, four activities, broad activities. So when you say breakdowns happens here, so it is very difficult to actually understand what happens. Okay, but when you capture those as sequence information, now you know exactly what happens, that after this particular step breakdown happens. That means we need to figure out why this happens and how this can be resolved. Same is true for any contextual inquiry. Okay, whether you are talking about navigating a mobile application. Okay, first, probably an use case scenario defines this, but when you try to go for a particular sequence in great detail, then probably you may identify a particular problem. Okay, so that's about sequence model. Next is artifact model. So artifact model means this describe all sort of tools, techniques that are used in this particular scenario, and this give you an estimation how the stakeholder perform particular task. So what sort of products, what sort of techniques, tools they are using, and if there are issues with these, then those also can be rectified in a design process. Okay. Then there is cultural model. So cultural model defines the influence between various stakeholders. So here, if you see here, you will not see artifacts, or you will not see activities, but you will see different stakeholders. For example, you have owners, you have regulators, you have customer, you have a software server, then you have a cook, then you have a cleaner, okay, and then another maintenance people. Now here you will see how they influence each other. So if you see, like, they are saying like adhere to all regulations while conducting business, so they give this instruction, so they influence owner to be in regulation, to maintain, to comply with regulations. Then they said, okay, yes, I will. That means they are in greater power. Similarly, owner and customer, so customer give complaint and owner try to help them, so this is mutual. Similarly, helping server, okay, is more automatic. It's like software, it's like, okay, I'm waiting for the order, please do it fast. It's like, okay, I'm doing, trying my best, so this is very automatic. Then you have the cook. So basically the cook wants customer satisfaction. Oh, sorry, this is the owner. So owner wants from the cook that you cook food so well that okay, I got good customer satisfaction. Cook says, okay, I'll be doing my best. Then get my daily food items. So cook ask the owner that okay, get my food. Then the owner said, okay, share your items list. Okay. So like that, they communicate with each other and they show how in for what particular activity they influence each other. Now, whenever there is a particular fault occurs, for example, in a refrigerator, for example, the food was old, or if certain items are missing, probably you will know that get my daily items food. Probably either the cook did not ask, or either the owner did not provide them. So one of them will be the issue. That's why that particular item is missing in a menu. So again, in this particular way also we can identify where a problem happens in a particular context. So this is again a mind map where we try to capture the influence of people in that particular context or scenario of use. Okay, so this is cultural model, and the final model is physical model. This is defined by making a physical representation of the space. So this represent how is the restaurant. Okay, this is the lawn area, where is the location for owner, where the people sits. Okay, where is the kitchen, where is the storeroom. So in case user have problem in accessing the washrooms, so you can represent those context by using this physical model diagram. Okay. So generally what happens in a contextual inquiry, you may come across different issues. So issues in a contextual inquiry can be of related to physical space, can be related to influence of activities, can be related to task execution. Okay, can be related to your communication, or issues related to your artifacts. So because the nature of the issues can be classified into these five categories, we represent them using these five physical models, and that's the best way how you can record a particular contextual inquiry for later use, for future use. Okay. So that's the end of today's class. So I hope I clarify your doubts. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Any question?
No, sir.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for attending the class. So I'm trying to give you a more realistic perspective on the subject matter by giving you examples, and I hope and I could do the justice by providing you correct information. In the next class, I'll be discussing about various contextual inquiry techniques, the other types of techniques like interviews, questionnaires, and other secondary way of doing user study. So thank you very much for being in the class. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.